Welcome, listeners, to NortheastValleyNews.org. You're listening to a brand new podcast, the first episode of Behind the Bench, the legal side of sports with Anne Phillips. Today we're going to be talking about the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash, and some of the potential lawsuits that may be coming out of that. But before we do that, as we normally do on our podcast on Northeast Valley News, when we have a new host or hostess, in this case in the studio, we like to find out a little bit about them. We have Anne Phillips, as I said in the title, and she's going to give us the 90-second, I know it's not much time, but the 90-second explanation of who Anne Phillips is.
Well, thanks, Oli. First of all, thank you so much for having me and for helping me to create our new podcast, Behind the Bench.
Excited.
Me too. I have been a practicing attorney in Arizona for about 31 years. I primarily practice in the area of criminal defense. I have my law degree from the big university in town that I won't mention.
Okay, yeah, we won't say that.
And recently I went back to law school a couple of years ago to get what's called a master's in law, an LLM, which is a post-law degree for idiots who haven't had enough schooling, to specialize in an area of law, and I received my master's in sports law and business.
Oh, great.
And so I know a little bit about sports law, love talking about sports, love talking about the legal aspect to things that happen in the sports world in the news. There are crossovers maybe more often than people even realize when it comes to sports and the law. And so that's what we're going to do here.
Great. And a lot of times we don't understand the law side of sports as well. So this is a great opportunity for us to enlighten some of our listeners and perhaps learn something ourselves.
Well, and hopefully I'll be explaining things so that people have a better understanding of what's going on in the sports world in terms of law and litigation.
Right. Now, for our first episode, we are going to talk about the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and his daughter and the other 7 passengers on the helicopter that crashed 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago, the 26th of January, I think is the date. A couple of Sundays ago. This crash occurred in California, and we're going to talk about some elements that may have been present that could have contributed to that accident, and also what may come out of it, what sort of lawsuits or what kind of legal situations might arise. So let's just get right into it, and why don't you just get us going on this and see where it takes us.
Okay, and if I, jump into too much legalese, stop me and make me explain. Lawyers sometimes are guilty of doing that.
I will. I'll bring it back down to layman's terms if I have to.
So, I'd like to just start with a disclaimer. Nothing I say should be construed as taking anything personally towards anyone. Even though I am a Suns fan and not really a Lakers fan, I have nothing personal against Kobe Bryant or anything like that. I know there's been some fallout with some people making comments in the media, and it is not my intent to disparage him or his career in any way. This is strictly a legal viewpoint. One of the things that lawyers are guilty of, and if they deny it, they're lying, is that when we hear about some tragedy, such as this, our mind immediately thinks, okay, who's going to be liable? Who's going to be sued? Because that's just the way we're trained to think.
Right. No, absolutely.
So I don't know that there will be any lawsuits coming from this accident. I imagine there will be, because that's just the nature of our culture and our society and our country. When something bad happens, there are lawsuits. So with that caveat, I would like to talk about possible causes of the crash. As most of you probably know, the helicopter itself, the parts and the pieces are physically in Phoenix.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, which is the federal agency that's investigating the crash, actually have all the parts here, and they're going through the parts here. Why here? I don't know. That I don't know, but I do know that it is actually physically in Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
And as a matter of fact, today we heard the news that I guess the motor or the engine has been ruled out as a cause. Engine failure has been ruled out as a cause.
Right. I just read that before you arrived, that they had decided that wasn't an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, so
although we don't know specifically about the other bits that help stabilize and steer the helicopter. Those we don't know about yet, I guess.
That's exactly right, and there could be an issue with one of the rotors or any of a number of other things on a helicopter that can break or fall off.
There's lots of moving parts on a chopper, I think.
Yes. So we've heard a lot about the weather being the cause, and the heavy fog and the marine layer in LA. And so if you've ever been to LA, you know that the fog combined with the marine layer can be quite thick. And I have spoken to a pilot who actually was flying for a commercial airline that day, and he was flying out of Burbank, which is not far from John Wayne Airport, which is where Kobe was flying out of. And he said the Los Angeles area was completely socked in that morning, and that they were not flying with visual flight rules, or VFR. It was all instrument rating flying, instruments only. So that seems to be the first thing that people are bringing up as a possible cause, that the pilot who normally a helicopter is flown with visual flight rules, and all that means is you can see the ground, you can see the horizon, you can see landmarks. Having flown in many helicopters myself over the years, the pilot looks at landmarks like a road map.
Sure.
And so it's the simplest way to fly is visual flight rules.
Right. We have a large, east of town, there's a large thing that says Phoenix, and then there's a big arrow pointed towards Phoenix on the side of a hill. Right. I don't know if it's made of rocks or not, I don't know. But we do have one that's great big.
That's interesting. And yeah, pilots probably use that as a reference. But for example, cotton fields might be a visual reference, a large building, a stadium, a tall building, anything that is on the ground can be used as a visual flight reference. Body of water,
right,
I'm sure they use the ocean in LA as a visual flight reference.
I hope so.
Right, but when the conditions are poor weather-wise and an area is fogged in, as it was on this particular day, then pilots are required to fly via instrument. Okay. The instruments in the cockpit and via help from air traffic control. And I don't know if we know if the pilot was instrument rated or not. It is a separate rating for a pilot to be instrument rated.
No, I did not know that.
So yeah, so I don't know. I haven't heard, and I don't know if he was instrument rated. I thought I heard initially that the aircraft was not checked out for instrument flying because the company that owned the helicopter, and there's been some misinformation that Kobe actually owned the helicopter. That is not accurate. The helicopter was actually owned by Island Express, which is a touring company out of Orange County. I understand they've grounded all of their craft now and took their website down in light of the crash and what's happened. Okay. And so they normally flew tours of Catalina Island, other air tours around the LA area, and so their tours were visual based, and they wouldn't necessarily need an instrument rating because they wouldn't be flying in bad weather.
Right, that makes sense. So
that would be the first cause that they're probably looking at, is whether or not the pilot was instrument rated. So if I can bring out my litigation chart here.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll bring this out.
Okay.
We'll probably in the video we'll put a picture of this in there.
Okay. I don't know if you can.
Our listeners that are are at home right now listening are going to be a little bit out of luck.
Okay, that's okay. I will read it out loud.
Okay, good.
And if you're watching, you'll get to see a picture of it. Okay, because I like visual aids here. Okay, so the first possible cause and first possible area for a lawsuit would be pilot error.
Okay, and this is the most likely, I think. I mean, we can generally say that it's more than likely, or not more than likely, but probably the strongest chance is that there was some kind of a pilot error, or maybe not.
From what we know right now, it seems like the pilot was flying in weather he shouldn't have been flying in. But we can talk about all the variables that go into that. So oftentimes, and even though the pilot is unfortunately deceased, his estate can be sued.
Oh.
So any of the parties on the airplane, any of the people who died, those families can file for wrongful death.
Okay.
And so often the pilot is named in the lawsuit. We don't know, maybe the pilot was sick. Maybe he had a heart attack and lost control. These are things that the NTSB is looking into. It could have been equipment failure. We know the engine was fine as of today. Apparently the engine was okay. But a number of other things could have gone wrong. Again, we talked about the rotors, or, I'm not a helicopter expert, but, on any piece of equipment, things can go wrong, things can break. So the equipment, the helicopter manufacturer can be sued. Maybe there was a defective part on the helicopter that should have been working that wasn't, or, fell off and it's not supposed to fall off. So the families might have a lawsuit against the manufacturer. All aircraft have to be inspected regularly by an FAA inspector. Even the hot air balloons that you see out over the valley sometimes, even a hot air balloon has to be inspected annually. So the person who inspected this helicopter, whoever the last inspector was, maybe they didn't do their job right. That person can be sued. Oh wow, I never contemplated that. That's why I'm here. Yeah, that's exactly. Why I'm here. The dealer who sold the helicopter can be sued. If Kobe was leasing the helicopter, the leasing company can be sued. And even though there may not be direct causes by these people for the accident, typically in a lawsuit, especially a wrongful death lawsuit, everybody who's ever touched an aircraft, in this case, can and will be named in the lawsuit. They may not be found liable, but they will be named in the lawsuit. And I do anticipate that the other family members will probably file a lawsuit. Like I said, that's just what we do in this country. That's just our culture. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a negative thing that, people, when they're grieving, there's no redress in our country. And in our country, monetary damages are the redress. We had some loss of family income by some of the people that died. Their family and their children that remain are no longer have the benefit of their income. So that's why people sue. It's not necessarily a bad or a negative thing. I think lawyers get a bad rap for always wanting to sue, but these are legitimate claims. Right. It keeps a lot of things in check. If just nothing happened when bad things happened, then bad things would happen all the time. And accidents do happen. Yeah, well, they do. And accidents do happen. Yeah. So, like in this case, if the pilot had a heart attack, nobody can predict that. Nobody can foresee that. The accident really isn't anybody's fault. But that doesn't mean there won't be a lawsuit. Air traffic control. We don't have full information about what the conversation was with the air traffic control tower between the pilot and ATC, we call them for short. But if I could just quote the little bit of information that we do have, And you asked me a great question earlier. The air traffic control is 100% federal government. Nobody has a private air traffic controller. So any of the ATC people that the pilot was talking to were federal government employees. And so...
Can I hold your visual aid for you? Or?
Yes.
Looks like you need a couple of hands.
Trying to
that way the camera can
figure out the best way to do it. Okay, that's
see it a little bit better.
That's perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I could just hide behind it. And then
Well, I'll leave that up to you. Okay.
All right, so here we've got this.
So
Great.
the air traffic control situation. So because the air and the atmosphere was soupy and foggy, the pilot was talking to air traffic control. And apparently he was flying quite low, which obviously is very dangerous in a city like LA that has lots of tall buildings and mountains. Apparently the air traffic controller told the pilot that he was too low. And he said that he couldn't climb any higher because he was in clouds. So apparently the last communication that we know about was air traffic control saying, we can't give you any more instruction. We can't see you on the radar. You're too low. And that was the end of the communication. So depending on what they said next might leave air traffic control open for liability. Now, air traffic control is the federal government, which means the taxpayers. So if they're traffic controlled and the federal government is sued, that's us, right? That's the taxpayers. But if air traffic control said, you know, climb higher and turn left, well, that's what the pilot did, and he crashed into a mountain after the left turn.
Right, so we don't know if that was something he did on his own or if there was something that air traffic control instructed him to do.
We don't know. Okay. Air traffic control might have said, we can't help you, and if you don't have visual access to where you're going, you need to turn around. Maybe he was turning around when he crashed. We just don't know, but that's another area or another potential defendant in a lawsuit.
Right.
Kobe Bryant himself could possibly be sued and be a named defendant, depending on his involvement with the helicopter company. We don't know. We know he didn't own the helicopter, but excuse me, maybe he was an investor in Island Express. That would open him to some liability. Maybe he had privately hired the pilot. We don't know. We don't know if the pilot was an employee of Island Express, or if he was an independent contractor, or if he worked for Kobe. And maybe Kobe said, you know, you need to get us there under any circumstance. You know, we need to get there. Let's just fly through it. And the pilot listened to him against his own better judgment, because it's always the pilot who has the last call on whether or not to fly in weather. Kobe Bryant and his estate might be open to some liability. And again, nothing personal against Kobe Bryant. I'm just strictly looking at this as from a legal standpoint.
Right, looking at all of the different angles. Right.
Yes, and obviously the owner of the helicopter, the Island Express company, might be liable, might have some liability. Maybe that helicopter had been in crashes before. Maybe they knew it was not safe. Maybe they hadn't had it inspected. Maybe there were some FAA rules, Federal Aviation Administration, maybe there were some FAA rules that weren't followed. And then, of course, the weather. The National Weather Service has been sued over the years for putting out bad forecasts. And again, the National Weather Service is another federal government agency, and maybe their fog detectors gave the pilot bad information. Maybe the pilot had information that where he was going, the weather was clear. And so he was flying based on false information. So that's a long, somewhat tedious explanation of all of the potential people that could be sued in an upcoming wrongful death lawsuit by any of the parties on the airplane. Kobe's family also could sue any or all of these parties. I would be very surprised if we did not see a lawsuit arise out of this crash.
Yeah.
Here, put that down.
There you go. Can have that back. So there's we still have there's still a lot of sort of unanswered questions to this particular case, and it'll be interesting to it'll be interesting to see sort of how it all pans out, I guess. What else should we talk about as far as this crash is concerned? What haven't we covered yet?
I'd like to talk about a likely cause of the crash. I'm no expert. I did speak to an expert who's a 20-year helicopter pilot, and his opinion, having flown over to LA many times, was that the pilot had something called spatial disorientation.
Okay, what does that mean?
The best way to describe that is, you know how when you go on a ride at an amusement park, a roller coaster that goes upside down, goes through corkscrews, loop-de-loops, those, how you feel confused and kind of disoriented because your equilibrium is all messed up.
Yeah.
That can happen to a pilot where there's no visual flight reference, where you can't see the ground, you can't see the horizon, and so your mind has no visual reference to determine where you are. And when you're in the air, nothing below you, nothing above you, nothing to the sides of you, the mind becomes very disoriented. And so this helicopter pilot believes that this is the likeliest cause. This was the cause of the plane crash that John F. Kennedy Jr. was involved in, almost 30 years ago now, I think, where his plane crashed. He was not instrument rated, and he somehow lost sight of the horizon. I don't even know if we know why, but that's what caused the crash in his case. So this helicopter pilot that I spoke to thinks that is the most likely cause. In which case, it'll be pilot error as a cause, and his estate will likely be sued. Now, I don't know what his financial situation is, or the insurance situation. I mean, hopefully the helicopter company had insurance.
We would hope so and assume, since they were a tour business and were, responsible for a lot of other people as well. So we would hope that's the case, but we don't know.
We would hope so, but sometimes one is surprised at the lack of responsibility that some people take, and that's why there's lawsuits, right? So we don't know the insurance situation. If the pilot was an employee, then the helicopter company's insurance company would cover him. If the helicopter pilot was not an employee, either an independent contractor or working, say, directly for Kobe, then the insurance company is going to try and deny any claims. So I'm imagining that soon we will start hearing about these things.
Now, how would we put a number on any of these lawsuits? I mean, we don't. It seems difficult for me to figure out what. I mean, it's just very complicated, I guess. My mind isn't really kind of wrapping around it as to what. I mean, we know some of the things that they may sue for, but we don't know where, how much this litigation is, what the numbers or that sort of thing would be. There's a lot of variables with that as well, isn't there?
That's a great question. Usually when there is a major litigation of this type, we hear millions and millions of dollars thrown around. Often when a party sues another party, they just ask for a big number, sort of their Christmas wish list, not fully expecting to get the full amount. Damages can be based on a person's loss of income. If as I mentioned a few minutes ago, if the family of one of the parties sues, they might claim lost wages. You know, if the one of the adults who perished was a breadwinner.
Okay.
We lost that person's income.
Right.
And if that person was, I'm not sure the ages of the people on board, but you know, that person was only 30 or 40 years old, you know, the family would have wanted to count on their income for another 30 years.
Right.
So that's factored in. A person's income. There are things like loss of consortium, emotional distress. Those are all things that come into play in determining a damages award.
Now, in my mind, there'd be quite a disparity between the potential lost earnings of somebody like Kobe Bryant when compared to the one of the other victims was a college baseball coach.
Right.
So I would imagine there'd be quite a disparity there, you know, as far as the litigation amounts would be concerned.
That's a great question, too, and that would only be perhaps the result and the outcome of how much money the plaintiff walked away with, because how much money someone has doesn't necessarily determine the amount asked for. I would be very surprised if the other passengers' families didn't sue Kobe Bryant's estate just because of the sheer size of it. There's so much money there that we call it deep pockets in the business, right? He would certainly be the one with deep pockets. I don't know how well off the helicopter company was, or the insurance company, or the type of policy that they had. But almost surely Kobe's estate will be sued for that reason, because he had so much money. And you can always sue and get a huge judgment and never collect a dime on it also.
Okay.
So it remains to be seen. Yeah, that happens. I mean, a person might sue someone in any situation for $3 million, get a $3 million award from a jury, but the defendant in the lawsuit becomes insolvent, files bankruptcy, doesn't have $3 million, and so you have a judgment for $3 million, but you can't get any money. That happens also.
I can imagine. I had another really stunning question. What was it? Shoot, I had it right on the tip of my tongue. What else have you? You have a lot of notes. Have we gotten to everything already? Okay, good, perfect. Not, I say already. I didn't mean already. I mean, well, I know what it was. How long do you think, as far as a time frame here is concerned? We're still, obviously, the investigation is still going on. So we are going to, there's going to be a little bit of time before that's actually comes to a conclusion. And then how long did things like this take? I mean, is this going to go on for a couple of years, or?
It could. I understand, and I keep hearing from the experts that it could take up to a year.
Okay.
And I don't know if you saw any of the photographs or video of the crash site.
Yes.
Everything was obliterated.
Yeah. Everything was ruined. Yeah.
And so they have to piece it together. I don't know how long that takes, but I keep hearing about a year. I was actually very surprised to hear today that they've already ruled out engine failure. Because it didn't look like anything like an engine laying on the ground.
That's a little surprising to me, too, that they would have been able to figure that out from all of those little itty-bitty pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's amazing what they can do, and they're highly skilled at crash recreations and putting parts together. That's what the NTSB